In this lesson, we're going to cover some Photoshop basics just on how to use the new documents panel, as well as how to just get started in opening a document. So if you're new to Photoshop, there's a lot of features and it might overwhelm you, so we'll just get through the basics and make sure you know how to navigate this workspace. So first of all, up at the top you have options how to basically navigate this panel. So we've got options like Learn. So if you're looking to learn Adobe Photoshop, they actually have some good beginner tutorials inside of here that you can take a look at. You can also access quick files that perhaps if you happen to be using Lightroom, or if you have things saved in the cloud, or if you've deleted files. We also have an option here to create new documents or open a document, and that will be something we'll cover in just a second. And then you will see that we've got options, just quick go-tos for starting a tutorial, as well as navigating through and looking at documents that you've recently used. So anything that you've recently opened in Photoshop, it will show usually down here, so that you can get through. There are different viewing options, so if you like to view things as a grid or as a list, there are different ways to view this information. So we're going to start out by creating a new document. And again, there's a lot of options here that Photoshop has added for us. So up at the very top we have different types of files. So if you're working on something specific, maybe for print or for web, or perhaps it's something you've saved, you can quickly get to any of those to see some default sizes. We're going to actually custom make a size. If you've recently created documents, these are all recent documents that I had created, so you will see anything that's been recently created customly. And then over here on the right side is our document information. So we're just going to run down through all of the settings that you want to be aware of. So first of all, if you want to save this setting for a future project, it's definitely not required, but if it's something you create often, you may want to create a preset, and basically you would just name it right here, and this is going to be the option to save it after you're done setting all these different settings. Okay, the different sizes here are going to be really important for you to pay attention to. So we've got the width and we've got the height, and then right here we've got different measurements to go by. So usually for most of your documents, if it's going to be a print document, you're more than likely going to use inches, and if it's going to be for a web or a user interface design, they usually use pixels. Okay, it's really important to pay attention to what that measurement is, because if it's off, it will definitely affect your final design. The other thing is the orientation here is pretty standard for any other program. If it's portrait, it's going to be more of a vertical setup. If it is landscape, it's going to be more horizontal. So if we were using this for our first project where we retouch a photograph, your size is going to be 8 by 10 or 10 by 8, and you get to choose whether you want it to be portrait or landscape. So I would make that decision based off of the photograph you choose. The other thing is we do want to pay attention to the resolution, so we're going to use 300 dpi, and that is basically saying that there's 300 pixels per inch that are going to basically be displayed in our photograph. So that is a very high resolution quality for the size that we're going for. The color mode is going to be RGB. You do have a lot of other options there. A word of advice for working in Photoshop is I would stick to RGB when you work, because it allows you to see all of the settings to be able to control things in your document. As you choose any of these other color modes, you may actually notice that some settings may go away. So it's encouraged to work in RGB, and then before you finish the project, if it needs to be in one of these other color modes, then you convert it after the fact. In most cases, we're going to stick to 8-bit documents, so unless you know that you need something different, I would leave that the default. The background contents, that's just basically the color of the background when you first open your document. In most cases, we're going to keep that white, but you do have options there. You do also have things like color profiles as well as pixel aspect ratios. I usually leave those the default. You should not need to change those. The artboards is an option that is newer in Photoshop in the last version or two. They're very useful in Adobe Illustrator. They do allow you to have multiple pages. I would encourage you in Photoshop not to leave that checked unless there's a purpose for using it. A lot of the times, especially as we get into web files, they do actually become more problematic in terms of saving files and optimizing files out, and they may actually restrict you. So unless you have a purpose for using it, I would leave that unchecked, and then just know that it's an option there. It's somewhat like Illustrator, but it's not as user-friendly as Illustrator's artboards, and we've actually encountered some problems in some of our web courses. So I would just make sure you're aware of what you are using as a setting. And then once we have all of these different things set, again, if you wanted this to be a preset, you would click this button and it would allow you to save it. And then we can just say create, and it creates a new document. Okay. Once you have this document open, we're going to be able to work, and we're going to get through some other lessons where we talk about all the different features in Photoshop. So we want to make sure you know how to open a document first. The other thing is just making sure that we know how to save a document. So as we go through, we're going to go through and choose to save as. And saving as allows you to save your file either in the cloud or on your computer. For this case, I'm going to actually save on my computer. I'm just going to save it to my desktop. Here is your place to name your file. You can name it Project 1 or whatever your requirements are for naming your file. And then the other thing to mention is the file type. So as we work in Photoshop, the Photoshop file is what you're going to want to use in most cases. That saves your source file. So as we work in Photoshop, we will be using things like layers, and that keeps all of the work that you're doing. So as you change this, you will notice this file type changes as well. Now I do want to also just quickly mention, sometimes I've had students that change this. It's Photoshop right here, but I can actually type JPEG. If you happen to have these and they don't match, you will have a problem opening that file. And so you would have to go back to your Finder and change this to PSD. And then if you do want it to be a JPEG, you would switch right here. Okay. We do have an entire page inside of our course that kind of walks you through the most important file formats. A lot of these you are not going to use. In most cases, we're going to use the Photoshop file format. We may use JPEGs or GIFs or PNGs. Okay, and we will talk about multiple ways that we can save them. And then there's also an option here for a TIFF file, that as we get into some print designs, you guys may use those in some of your print courses. And then there's also a Photoshop EPS, which it's not used as common, but if you have certain types of file types like a duotone or a clipping path, this may be an important file type for you later down the road. So just know that you do have a lot of options here, and you do have the ability to save it here, or if you wanted to save it in the cloud, there's an option there as well. So I hope that helps you all out, and we will continue to kind of walk you through the basics and get you through learning Photoshop.